know, Majcher, you're a Canadian, and you've told me that Canada suffers a lot from Wall Street. So before we get into a few questions of substance, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. As you said, I'm a Canadian. I started life after university, military kid. Went to London for my first job as a Eurobond trader. So I was a professional market maker in the city of London. Probably wasn't all that good at it, so I was motivated to return to Canada and join the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. It's our federal law enforcement agency. And soon I went into our undercover program and mirrored that with my financial education and background. I then embarked on a long career in covert operations. Probably half my career I worked for U.S. government agencies because I was comfortable dealing with money, dealing with cocaine, drugs, terrorists. So I had a pretty good cross-section, but I was always dealing primarily in the financial milieu and negotiating from that basis. So after a number of years doing that, both north-south of the border and other places in between, I became officer in charge after all the scandals of Enron, Bre-X, and the like in Western Canada for what we call the Integrated Market Enforcement Team, which made me responsible of working under an integrated policing model to crack down on the abuse in our capital markets and really to bring and promote the integrity of Canada's capital market system, which really opened my eyes to the extent of some of the problems of which we're going to talk about today. But I also had a greater appreciation, just leading into your comment earlier about Canada being victimized. I would dare say that if not for American law enforcement, we'd have far more victims in Canada. The Americans, despite what people might think in America, in my experience at least, are probably the most effective and aggressive government for protecting its citizens from foreigners victimizing them. In Canada, we have nothing to parallel what goes on in the States. And in fact, and it's something, again, we can talk about here, when I met Eliot Spitzer when he was the New York AG back in 2004, well, when I did meet him, I said, hey, it's a pleasure to meet Canada's #1 enforcement officer, because he did more in policing and correcting illegal activities in the markets than anything I've ever seen in Canada, but it spills over across the border. So I don't think it's fair to say that America or Wall Street, while it has created great harm to innocent investors in Canada and elsewhere, I think it's also fair to say that American regulators and law enforcement, in many regards, have been that much more effective than in Canada or even other countries in the G7.
Well, that's fascinating because although I take your point, they're actually just doing token fines. And as you know from Sidney Powell's book, License to Lie, and the recent exoneration of General Flynn, we now know that the Department of Justice and the FBI is full of people who are willing to undermine justice. But let's take that as a positive note. Now, as a former clandestine case officer, and I actually chased terrorists once in Latin America, I understand that what you're going to be talking about in the next few questions is based on your being undercover and dealing with covert wires and actually being in the room when people are talking about how they pull off these huge scams.
Yeah, that's one of the advantages. Anything I talk about here is based on my own personal experience, either participating in the criminal act, observing the criminal act, or having it spoken about in front of me, and then also as an investigator. But in my covert career, I was also a commodity futures and options trader and broker, both in Canada and the United States. I spent several years inside the cartels because they were laundering money through that method. Prior to the events of 9/11, the single largest act of aviation terrorism was the Air India bombing. It was 747 over the Irish Sea that killed 340 people. So I ended up going into cells with the banker who financed that terrorist campaign, the same group that assassinated Indira Gandhi. The point being is this is a diaspora. The world is global. Criminality, terrorism, money laundering, it's a global problem, global issue. And so it's attracted to the marketplace that provides them the biggest funnel that they can move money or hide money or any of these illicit activities. That's why Wall Street, I mean, it is the dominant financial center on the planet. And as a result of that, there are those few who know how the game really works. They make a tremendous amount of money from it, and they do everything within their power, which means controlling Washington, D.C. that passes the law, Albany, your state government in New York, and they make darn sure that the system is designed to protect that cash cow.
I'm deeply impressed by your background. I'm deeply impressed by the authenticity of your experience and what you're about to share with us. I will just add the City of London as another area that needs deep focus. And I hope that President Trump might create an international council of advisors as he seeks to take back some of the trillions that have been stolen. So with that, let me go to my first question. As I've developed this project, one of the most powerful impressions that has come across to me, and I recognize that there are good people in law enforcement doing good things, but there seems to be a government awareness and complicity from the Senate Banking Committee to the SEC to FINRA to the self-regulating organization, which is not part of the U.S. government but gets away with murder, the Depository Trust Corporation. Can you speak to what governments know is going on and why they're not acting as much as they could?
Well, as you know, and I saw it again several times in my career, sometimes governments see that laws are being broken, but to enforce those laws creates a different set of problems for them, especially if you're targeting a particular group that the government doesn't want to have a conflict with. But in the specific case of naked short selling, abuse of capital markets, there's many parallels inside that framework where it's not just the people who are doing the specific naked short selling, it's the same bankers, the same platforms, the same derivative desks, it's the same DTC clerks within the banking system. It doesn't matter, okay, it's the naked short here today, it's the cross-border dividend arbitrage fraud over there. And I'll give you an example. I mentioned when I met Elliot Spitzer back in 2004. This very much parallels and tracks the issue. I had a cooperating witness who effectively is a whistleblower. He worked in the back office of doing a lot of derivative transactions of a major financial house. And he highlighted to me the scope and scale of how the system is being absolutely raped and pillaged by the insiders in the bank, and everybody was aware of it. And I used the example cross-border dividend arbitrage fraud, which parallels to some degree, again, the abuse of naked short selling. And we discovered that billions and billions of dollars were being fleeced out of the Treasury of the United States, Canada, and most countries that have active trading, simply because when you, as a Canadian, if I own Microsoft stock, as an example, Microsoft's an American issuer. So I'm a Canadian. So when Microsoft pays its dividend, I don't get the full benefit of the dividend as a Canadian. I'm subject to a non-resident withholding tax. So that tax is held back so Uncle Sam can collect it to pay for hospital, schools, and things that governments do. But what I do is I get involved with large financial houses and banks, and I said, hey, listen, why don't we do a lot of securities lending, stock lending, and hey, all you Canadian guys, all you guys in London, why don't you hoover together hundreds of millions of dollars, billions of dollars worth of Microsoft stock, because we know the dividend date's already been announced. Let us do a big block trade in the market so people see it, so it's legit, but it's all contrived. So come dividend date, that the holder of that of Microsoft shares is an American entity. That American entity gets the full benefit of the dividend. And then what typically happens, they construct another way to do the trade to unwind it. So I got to get the shares back, the people I bought it from. But also what I do is I'm at the derivative desk in New York, and I've already got the deal with the big bank in London or Toronto. And I say, hey, listen, just have my DTC clerk, Depository Trust Corporation, look at, why don't we just do a cross-border repo and unwind that trade? So the public market sees this big block trade as if it's a legitimate transaction, but we did it for a different purpose. And so we unwind the trade, all is forgiven, and the only people who lose out is Uncle Sam on the Treasury, because I get my shares back in Canada. I've simplified it, but and governments are a little bit aware of this, but it goes on. But what was interesting at that time, and we ran an undercover operation, with the New York AG. We wired up our fellow. And we immediately got traction with some Wall Street bankers. Unfortunately, he had a very serious medical issue that arose, and so we couldn't deal with it. But what was telling about that, Robert, was as I assembled a team to work in conjunction with the New York AG, I had two senior investigators seconded over to me from the Canada Revenue Agency, which is just like your IRS. And they disclosed to me, they said, you know, Bill, this is very interesting. And the reason we're here is that about 2 years earlier, a couple of the big Canadian banks sent a letter to the Canada Revenue Agency asking for a forward tax ruling as to the legitimacy of this practice of cross-border dividend arbitrage. And, you know, we couldn't get our heads wrapped around it because the reality of Bill, we have no ability, no auditors. IRS doesn't have the ability to go into the Wall Street banks and do an audit. We rely blindly and solely on what the bank's internal auditors provide to us in the form of numbers. So you've got bank employees who are incentivized by bonuses to make sure the numbers are good, but also there's a complexity. And so external auditors from IRS or Canada Revenue Agency, they simply don't have the broadband or the skill set to go inside these large banks and start to decipher how did that bank make, you know, $15 billion this quarter. Well, they made it by doing all these trades, both, again, the naked shorts and everything else. But the Canada Revenue Agency said the problem is just too big, too complicated, and they left it alone. They just ignored it. So when we had this investigation, they saw it as an opportunity to sort of figure out what's going on. And unfortunately, our cooperating witness fell ill, but it never got followed up, you know, afterwards. But the problem hasn't gone away, and you see it manifested. I read the news ever since I left policing, and I see the trading. I see what's getting reported. All of these are variations of the same principles, the same platforms, and the same banks. The problem has not gone away. In fact, if anything, it's gotten worse.
That's fascinating. Was there any polonium anywhere near your cooperating witness? Because I see a lot of people die. I mean, John Quinn in 2009 was the big one. He appears to have succumbed to what we call Boston brakes in the United States, where you hijack the car and turn off the brake and ramp up the gas. This is fascinating, and I hope that one day you get called out of retirement to help clean this up. And I'm huge on truth and reconciliation. I think there's a lot we cannot undo, but we can stop it going forward. And that's a big part of my motivation with this project. So are there other parallels within the capital markets that demonstrate the same scale of catastrophic failure of regulators, law enforcement, and financial intelligence units? And frankly, I know CIA. CIA does not do financial intelligence. They're incapable of adding 2 + 2. So tell us more on that.
Well, you know, the case in point, everything you hear about today is about money laundering. That's all we've heard for the last 20 years, right? Money laundering, money laundering, money laundering. So, you know, most people are following the FATF guidelines, about 40 some recommendations. So let's go back when they implemented this. Just in the last 10 years alone, since the 12 years and since the financial crisis, there's been over probably $1 trillion worth of fines, penalties, disgorgements against all the banks for money laundering. Are you trying to tell me that there's less money laundering going on today than before all that? We're $1 trillion later. You got bank fees up the yin-yang for every client or consumer at a bank. Most of the banks shafted the taxpayer anyways, because when they had to pay those fines and penalties, that was a tax break, it was tax deductible. And they ended up charging more in fees. Every time you use an ATM card, you know, you're paying for it. But where it really is obvious, okay, you're with CIA, so this is germane to you. So from 2008 to 2015, you know, what part of the world most had the focus, or ought to have had the focus, of most of the US and certainly NATO and the like? Probably Russia, right? So Russia, you know, they invaded Georgia, the state of Georgia, not the state of the United States, but the country of Georgia, into the Crimea, all the activities in the Ukraine. We know that they didn't just decide on Monday we're going to do it on Wednesday. They were in there a year before, deploying money, deploying people, laying the groundwork. So let's look at that. We put all this money, all this effort, all these people who made careers coming from Department of Justice and Washington, D.C., that didn't ever go any further than that. And what you had is you had the what's called the Russian global laundromat investigation, where between, depending who you believe, anywhere between 30 and 80 billion dollars came out of Russia and Azerbaijan and went in through banks in Moldova and Latvia. And what are the populations of those countries? A couple million at best, and did all the laundering. Then during that same period of time, you had the Danske Bank money laundering scandal, which took place in Estonia. Upwards of 300 billion US dollars got laundered out of Russia and Azerbaijan all through that period. And then again, went through Latvia, went through a bit of Belarus, went through Estonia. All the banks involved in laundering all that money, they have more employees than the population of the countries involved. And so what does that say about where's the much vaunted intelligence agencies that should be focused on that part of the world that miss, over $300 billion that is coming through that very volatile region? What happened to the financial intelligence units? What happened to the central banks that are in those jurisdictions? What happened, with one of the unique things is at that same point in time, every bank that was nailed, and you're talking the top 10 banks, every one of them had embedded within them lawyers, primarily from ex-Department of Justice or SEC, as monitors. That's the vig to the buddies. Hey, you're going to go inside that bank. They're going to pay you and your law firm $40-50 million a year because you're the experts on money laundering. You're going to find out everything that's going on, and we're going to correct it. And you're going to be well paid to do that. And when I leave government, make sure I come into your law firm. And not a single one of those monitors picked up on any of that.
Well, let me make one point, and you may or may not know about this, but Buzzy Krongard was assigned to the CIA to run a $240 billion gold war against Russia. And John Brennan, who is facing indictment now for the Russian witch hunt that was contrived by Brennan and MI6 and Gina Haspel in London, chief of station, they ran $240 billion to basically carry out an economic war against Russia. And Browder was their agent in Russia. So it's a two-way street. And CIA was totally engaged in money laundering and bribery and corruption and so forth. So there are no clean hands here. Now, let me go on to my next question, because you obviously have thought a lot about how to reform markets so they're transparent, they're not rigged to favor the few. Are our markets salvageable? And bearing in mind that you'll be, addressing President Trump at the end, what kind of reforms are you thinking about as a professional law enforcement officer?
Well, the first thing, I think there's a couple, I know they sound like trite lines, but there's some truth to them, and it's my own perspective. But you got to remember, with financial crime, the bad guys have all the money and no rules. The good guys have all the rules and no money. So, that's a huge burden to overcome, especially when they've stolen billions of dollars. And that's going to be the first line of defense. The second thing you have is you got to realize we don't catch the smart guys. We don't. At least in my experience, the only time we catch the smart criminals is because of whistleblowers, which is how they got the Danske Bank and the Russian laundromat was whistleblowers. It wasn't all these much vaunted regulators. And so, that's about the only way you're really going to get the smart guys. And the fundamental problem, again, it really surrounds Wall Street in the US, but equally true of Canada and the UK. The underlying guiding legal principle when it comes to financial crime is that the accused is innocent until proven broke. So, once they run out of money, you can get deals made. But until then, it is just a cash cow. And if I've got the money, how do I inculcate myself from scrutiny? How do I make sure that I get perhaps Glass-Steagall rescinded, which happened in 1999? Why do you think you get the holder with him moving out of federal jurisdictions? There is money at play here, and people talk all the time about, the great American democracy. Well, what I see is the great American lobbyist. And they have more influence over what happens in public markets than the average American who goes in and out every day, watching their pension funds, working overseas, whether it be in the military or the like, maybe making $60,000, $80,000 a year if they're younger. And they want to hope that their pension plans are looked after for when they get older. And that's very much a secondary consideration. This is all about the money. And case in point, Henry Ford once said, listen, if you're going to have a three-legged stool and you have to kick out one leg, doesn't matter which leg you kick out, that stool is falling over. The entire banking system today, everybody knows the flaws. Everybody knows where it's broken. It's obfuscation, but they know. Many things were told to me when I was working, Bill, this is how it really works. And again, enough people are coming forward. But, we have in the system today a two-legged compliance stool, and we don't have a three-legged compliance stool. And the first leg on that compliance stool for financial institutions is we have a rules-based system. So we tick the box that, yep, we're doing KYC on you. I can tell you, as a covert operator, I used to train our operators how to set up correspondent banking relationships. Easiest thing in the world is, hey, you're giving me the roadmap. I just tell you what I know you want to hear, and I have enough support ID that I can make it happen. And bad guys can do that too. So the pedantic rules-based model is an abject failure, if you look at money laundering at least. Then you go, okay, the other way we're going to do it is we're going to make it a risk-based model. Well, that risk-based, one size fits all. Risk-based means, oh, this guy's got a business in Pakistan. Doesn't matter that he's been doing it legitimately for 50 years. We've now decided Pakistan's a risk, so let's drill down and not deal with it. But that's how the banks and the financial institutions get themselves out of trouble. They just make sure they can tick that box, so they mitigate it. But what they don't have is a demonstrable and verifiable principle-based governance model, and they're deathly afraid of it. I show you something here. It's self-serving, but I told you, right now in Germany, you've got a big issue with multi-billions of dollars by some of the major banks for the ex-cum dividend fraud, where they're fleecing the treasury of Germany. And again, naked short sellers play the same game. Jurisdiction equals freedom. So they know how to, your earlier guests on with Wes Christian, where he talked about the difficulty of jurisdiction. Again, if I'm to start life as a financial criminal, I would have it tattooed on my chest so I never forgot it. Jurisdiction equals freedom. And so I do it that way. I can park all the money, ill-gotten gains, the trades in Gibraltar or places that aren't as heavily enforced. But the where this all goes is you have no shortage of professionals, like I say, who are going to step in and run interference for you. But people don't want to know the truth. I told the banks that are now under investigation, 3 of them, listen, you can test for this cross-border dividend arbitrage fraud. And here's how you do it on a principle-based model. They wouldn't go near it. And I had a few champions within the banks trying to get this program in there. And they came back and said, Bill, they were scared of you. I said, why? What are they scared about? This isn't a reportable compliance model. I can do it and using tradecraft to ensure that we don't trigger a reportable event so we can deal with it on a proactive way for the banks. They said, Bill, they're scared who they're letting in the bank. I said, what the hell does that mean? They've already got monitors from the DOJ embedded. What, they think I'm still working for the government and I'm coming and do it this way? That's nonsense. But they won't touch a principle-based governance model. And it's not unique to American banks or Canadian banks. You look at the Haynes Commission that just wrapped up 6 months ago in Australia. Every bank, hopeless in terms of criminality. I had read one report that upwards of 65% of Australian citizens who held bank accounts were victims of criminal activity by the very banks they entrusted their money with. So the problem is not unique to American banks or Canadian banks or likewise. It is a systemic problem. So the only way that it's going to be changed is to say, why don't you have a principle-based governance model, a third leg on the stool? There's got to be a reason why you don't have it. And I know as trite as it sounds, People say that it's financial crime. Nobody really suffers. I'm here to tell you the difference. Financial crime, especially catastrophic financial crime, is a very violent crime. And the reason I say it's a violent crime, let me put it to you this way, Robert. You walk out of your office later today and somebody clubs you over the back of the head with a brick. Gives you a sore head, a few stitches. It's not fun. You're going to be a bit uptight for a few days. But all you've lost is your wallet and a couple $100 in it and some credit cards. So that's a violent crime. Yeah, that guy's going to go to jail for 10, 15 years if he gets caught, depending on how many times he's done it. But now I'm going to go and I'm just going to do a fraud while we're here talking. And I'm going to take 30, 40 years of your sacrifice and saving, and I'm going to snatch your dreams of your retirement for you and your spouse, because you don't have enough years to recover what I've just taken from you. What does that lead to for many people? It leads to suicide. I've been to enough sudden deaths. Nothing pretty about seeing a head blown off or somebody hanging, and then the devastation that leaves to the family. We have to start treating financial predators and financial criminals the same way as I would a serial violent killer. I'm close to saying, like a Bernie Madoff, if I had my way, I wouldn't be wasting money on him.
Madoff was a token. I agree with you, and I will post to the website anything you want to send me in terms of, for example, that briefing. I'm trying to educate the public and create public awareness with this nonprofit #unrig look at naked short selling. As you have been speaking, I've been thinking to myself three things. The first is we have to have a global regime of monitoring that combines the signals intelligence capabilities of China, Russia, and the United States at a minimum. So we need now an international, because I've got it all. We've got all the emails. We've got the emails of Merrill Lynch telling the compliance officer to piss off, that they're going to continue to do it. We've got all the phone calls. We've got all the game chat, hidden conversations. That these people have been operating with impunity. So as soon as we get a signals intelligence laydown on them, each of them are toast. The second thing I think is, in the military chain of command, you talk about, I need a single belly button to push. Every trade should have a name on it. Every trade should be signed, and it should be signed by three people: the guy making the trade, their reporting senior, and their reviewing officer. And, obviously the reviewing officer can be on a weekly or monthly basis. The third thing that strikes me is that it's time to start putting people in jail. And the Holder Memorandum was a horrible, horrible perversion of justice. And I'm hoping that I'm doing a national intelligence estimate for the president that will be delivered to President Trump on the 22nd of June, and they can't stop it. And that is going to recommend a Barr memorandum that overturns all of this and starts putting people back in jail. So let me ask you, is there a problem with compliance and governance models? You've kind of talked about that. You've talked about the design flaw. Is there anything else you want to say, or should we go directly to you speaking to President Trump on the golf course for 2 minutes?
I'm hoping it'd be longer than 2 minutes, but if I had that opportunity, it would be to say, listen, the reason that the system distrusts you so much, President Trump, is because you're an outlier. You don't come from that system. You didn't make your wealth from doing financial engineering. Yes, you've done it for projects. But when you looked at over the last 30 years, 40% of the GDP of the United States was predicated on financial engineering. No wonder your factories left and went overseas. You weren't creating real jobs. So you weren't creating bricks and mortar. It was an artificial construct because of easy credit and all these derivative contracts and products. I mean, everything is fundamentally either it's defined by equity, meaning ownership, or it's defined by debt, meaning you lent money. Everything else is just fluff. And we're fooled by fancy terms. We're fooled by the view that technology is an element of a crime. It's not. It's just simply a medium and a platform. What you have to understand is money and trading today is global. It is not recognized by the U.S. border alone. What people like, though, is the U.S. dollar and the trade and clearing systems. But you need to have uniformity in terms of settlement between all markets. As soon as there's an arbitrage, people take advantage of that. You have to realize that, remember I said jurisdiction equals freedom earlier. As a criminal, that is one of my greatest gifts, is my ability to leapfrog ahead of enforcement actions, because different laws, different disclosures, different ability to get evidence. So you need to neutralize the playing field to a common playing field with common settlement terms, and make it that way. Also, I would love to say, look, pick any 5 companies and just as a model, say, okay, on January 1st, we are going to ask all certificates issued by that company to be identified. And who's ever holding them, they're in the game. Everybody else, you have nothing. What are you going to do? You want to get people's attention and bring the game down real fast. That's the way to do it. And anybody talk to you yet about DMA, direct market access trading?
No. If you want to say something about that, please do.
Okay. So DMA trading. There was a time when all the brokerage firms, when you and I bought and sold stock, it would go through a brokerage firm, and so it allowed them to know that they had the stocks in case you went short, that they could cover it, as you've heard from your earlier guests. But then a number of years ago, they came up with what they call DMA, direct market access. Especially when you had you think about, Bloomberg at one point. It's not a brokerage house, but I could buy and sell stocks through Bloomberg. And so Bloomberg had no ability. I don't know if they realized, but hey, we're selling stock, but how do we know we have the positions to cover it? Is that creating a liability to us? And I think they've went on and they've sold it to Goldman now. So the issue is there are choke points in all of this that you can identify when things are going through the spout. Here in Hong Kong, there's a tremendous amount of global banks, and they do a lot of trading. And I've had the opportunity to speak with a number of the people who work on those trading platforms, and they're talking about the efficiency, moving the trade, institutional stock back and forth. And then I asked them, I say, hey, listen, so you guys do DMA trading, direct market access trading? Oh yeah, of course. I said, okay, so you're pretty satisfied? You've covered all the shorts? To a man or girl, a smirk comes on their face. Well, I wouldn't quite say that. Of course, yes, you know what I'm saying. You're churning the fees, you're getting the commissions, you're creating a false volume in the market, and you have no idea whether you are obeying the law or not. And so I think, as you say, you almost need a flying squad. I mean, President Trump understand that naked short selling could be stopped in a couple simple ways. I would also look at bringing back some of the better benefits of Glass-Steagall, because once investment banking overrides corporate banking, you've got all this leverage that's working against the investor, but works well for the bank that's capitalizing on that leverage, and the ability to hide bad trades or to allocate through omnibus accounts where they want the better trades to go, which is usually benefits friends and family, for lack of a better word.
Let me ask you this question is a final question, because a number of people have told me that if we eliminated naked short selling, the wealth that is created and the stock market's health and vibrancy would actually improve considerably. I'm trying to wrap my head around that. Do you have any thoughts on that? Is there a value to restoring integrity to the Wall Street marketplace?
Well, of course, there's the benefit. I mean, many people, they ask me, Bill, do you, what stocks do you recommend or do you invest? I said, I've lost all confidence in the public markets. And the purpose of the capital markets is so, average Joes can change the form of their investment. I want to sit on cash. I like what that engineering company is doing, or I like what that technologies company is doing. The problem is I don't trust the platform that it's on. And so I don't want to give my money to something I don't understand, or that can be rigged against me. Why not just go to Vegas and roll the dice? Because the odds seem just as good. And I think it's the lack of confidence in our capital markets. And that was what made America the shiny beacon. I mean, I take the view that as goes America, goes the world, simply because it's the dominant economy. It's the default currency of the world. One time, I'm not sure if many people would have the same view, but it was viewed as a land of fair play and opportunity. Today, I think this is an issue that transcends politics. You can be poor and Democrat and poor and Republican, and this is all about, if I worked for it and I invested it with a set of rules, I fulfill my end of the social contract with government, Mr. President, by the fact that I paid my taxes, and I expect that there's a standard of conduct and care from the government to protect me as a contributor under that social contract. I don't see that government's holding up its end of the bargain. So can you please work with Congress to address that deficiency?
Let's stop there. I really think that there is, I did a thesis on predicting revolution, my first graduate thesis, and the two biggest causes of revolution are loss of faith in the government and concentration of wealth. And naked short selling appears to capture both of those. Well, God bless you, Bill. God bless all of those watching. God bless America and Canada. And God bless China and Russia and every country that wants to put all of this crime down. And of course, God bless the President of the United States of America. Thank you, sir.
Thank you for having me. Pleasure.